One.
It doesn't seem to have started yet, huh?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Going live to attendees in 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Good morning and welcome to this session in conversation with members of the European Research Council's Scientific Council. My name is Tony Lockett. I'm the head of communication at the ERC Executive Agency, and I'm joined this morning by our president, Professor Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, and one of the Scientific Council's 3 vice presidents, Professor Fabio Zwirner from the University of Padua in Italy. Good morning to all of you who've joined us. This session is designed to provide an opportunity for participants in the Research and Innovation Days to have a conversation with these 2 distinguished members of our Scientific Council, to engage in a conversation with them about the Scientific Council's unique role at the ERC and some of the priorities at this particular moment when we're in transition to a new EU framework program for research and innovation, Horizon Europe, which should be starting at the beginning of next year. But also, I think we'll be talking about more generally the role of frontier research and research careers, because the ERC sees itself not just as a funding agency, but also as a body that makes the case for fundamental research, groundbreaking research, and the bottom-up approach to research, and an organization that is there to encourage particularly younger people to consider a career in science and research. And I know that our President, Professor Bourguignon, is very keen also to enter into a dialogue with those of you who may be at an earlier stage of your career about his experience personally, but also talking with a lot of our grantees about their careers and about how the ERC can support those of you who are considering embarking on a career in research. So just a few housekeeping announcements. We're going to be starting off just in a moment with a few icebreaker questions. We'll be using the poll functionality here for that. Then we will be beginning to gather questions. We'll be using the question and answer, the Q&A functionality, and that gives you the possibility to ask questions, but also to vote on questions. So we'll be able to see which are the most popular questions. If you see a question from another participant that you're also interested in, you can vote on that, and then the most popular questions will certainly be those that we'll do our best to answer during the session this morning. And there'll also be some introductory remarks by Professor Zwirner, and then both Professor Bourguignon and Professor Zwirner will be tackling your questions during the session. And we have until midday to go through that and to cover the various questions. So let's start off with some icebreaker questions. I'm going to publish the first of those now. They're basically designed to try to get a feel for who we have in the session this morning. Obviously, we would have liked to be in a room and to be able to see you, but that's not possible these days. So we'd like to hear, first of all, from you a little bit about the profile of the participants in this session. So the options are you a scientist, a researcher, a policy officer or consultant, a student, a member of the public, a citizen interested in science, a member of staff of one of the EU institutions, or if we haven't been imaginative enough in our categories and you don't fit into any of the aforementioned categories. So I can see that people are voting now. Just give you a few more seconds. Fabio and Jean-Pierre, can you see the results of this poll, or do I need to do something to...
For the moment, I'm only seeing the list of categories.
Okay. Well, then I can tell you, I'm going to close the poll and let's see if that does the trick. But before I do so, let me tell you that the most popular category, and this was also the case in our session on Tuesday with colleagues from the ERCEA management team, is the third category, a policy officer or consultant. We have, that's with about 50% of the audience. And then the second, if we add them together, scientists and researchers, about 20% of our audience this morning. But let me close the poll and see if that does the trick. Is it possible now to see the results?
I don't see any result. But,
okay, I don't know if our technician can help with that, but otherwise I can report on the results because I seem to be able to see them. But let's move on to the second question, which is to find out where in the world our audience this morning come from. So the question is, where are you based? And the options are Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania, Australasia, North America, and South America. So for the moment, what I see is that virtually all of our participants this morning are based in Europe. Obviously, this is a question that has some relevance because the ERC, as you may know, is open to the world. We do welcome applications to our grant schemes from researchers based anywhere in the world, although there is an obligation if you win an ERC grant to come and perform your research, spend at least 50% of your time in a host institution in Europe. But what I see for the moment is that basically our audience this morning is based in Europe. So I think that's a relevant piece of information in terms of getting an understanding of who we have with us this morning. And then let me just move on quickly to the final question, which is to ask you how familiar you are with the European Research Council. And the options are very familiar, moderately familiar, and not familiar. I think this will be helpful for Jean-Pierre and Fabio in understanding how to pitch the presentation and the answers to the questions, to understand how familiar our audience already is with the European Research Council. And as people are voting, what I can see is that the first option is the most popular with 58% of the vote. So the majority of our audience this morning is already quite familiar with the ERC, so I think that's interesting to note. 39% moderately familiar and only 4% not familiar at all. So I think we can assume a basic level of familiarity with the ERC, but clearly if people have joined us this morning, it's because they would like to find out more, and particularly to seize this opportunity to ask questions and to engage in a dialogue with Jean-Pierre and Fabio. Okay, so now I would just like to invite our participants to go ahead and post their questions in the question and answers tool here on the platform. So far I don't see any, but please don't be shy. Our first one is popping up now. But while you are putting your first questions, I will pass over the floor to Fabio, to Professor Zwirner, to give us a first introduction from your perspective, Fabio, as one of our vice presidents with quite a long-standing experience in the Scientific Council. If you could explain a little bit to set the scene for our conversation this morning about the ERC Scientific Council, its unique role, perhaps your experience as a member of the Scientific Council as a vice president, and a little bit how you see the priorities currently from your perspective sitting there as vice president of the Scientific Council. So over to you, Fabio.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I will take a level that takes into account also the moderately familiar part of the audience, and then we can go deeper in the rest of the discussion. So my name is Fabio Zwirner with Z, unfortunately it misspelled on the screen. I'm a physicist at the University of Padua, Italy. And as you said, I'm currently serving as ERC Vice President for Physical Sciences and Engineering. My personal research field are the unified theories of the fundamental interactions, but in my career, I have been following very closely also experimental particle physics and other fields of science because of my roles at CERN, the European Laboratory in Geneva, and in the INFN, the Italian National Institute for Nuclear and Particle Physics. Let me say a few words on the ERC and its mission. The ERC is the flagship program for the research financed by the European Union, and the mission is to support frontier research in Europe on the basis of ambitious proposals advanced by the researchers, using only scientific quality, aiming for excellence as the selection criterion. And the objective, that shouldn't be forgotten, is to make Europe competitive on the global research scene, where one finds today traditional superpowers as the United States and rapidly emerging superpowers such as China and other nations in the East. The method we follow is to leave the initiative to the researchers without politically established priorities, but with a rigorous quality selection by international panels of experts. And there is also a strong focus on young researchers with dedicated calls for them. Roughly 2/3 of the ERC funds are assigned to researchers less than 40 years old. When the ERC was inaugurated in 2007, Chancellor Merkel said that it could become the Champions League of European research. Today, on the basis of verifiable data, we can say that the ERC has been matching such an ambition. Leaving freedom to the researchers doesn't mean at all giving up the possibility of addressing the great societal challenges, promoting innovation and industrial development. ERC grants, for example, originated more patents than any other single program financed by the European Commission. Another hot example that was discussed at this workshop is the fight against COVID-19 and its multiple consequences. More than 180 ERC projects, many of which started well before the outbreak of the pandemic, generated relevant results to face it, with an investment of more than 340 million euros. Now, one of the main current concern of the ERC Scientific Council is the ERC budget in Horizon Europe. As you know, these days, the budget of Horizon Europe, the European Programme for Research and Innovation, is under discussion. And together with the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions and the research infrastructures, the ERC belongs to Pillar 1, Excellent Science. In the Scientific Council, we are worried that because of the COVID pandemic, the temptation to focus on a short-term view could prevail. The compromise reached by the heads of governments at the July summit would cause an important reduction of the Horizon Europe budget with respect to the ambitious proposals by the European Commission and by the European Parliament, and as a consequence, a reduction of the foreseen budget for the ERC. Without a correction raising both budgets, there will be a stagnation of the European investments in research, in particular on frontier research and innovation, in a moment when those investments are essential. We are also running the risk that the healthy balance between the so-called bottom-up research, the one driven by the initiative of scientists, and the research directed top-down according to current political priorities could be altered. You should keep in mind that without the phase of exploration, which generates new knowledge, we cannot proceed to the exploitation of such knowledge for innovation and economical and societal development. The bottom line on the budget is that for the ERC, the absolute minimum to continue its mission is the 16.6 billion euros in current prices that would correspond to the European Commission proposal of 2018, and that are already significantly lower than the corresponding proposal of the European Parliament at that time. Maybe I can stop here and we can leave space to the questions and answers. Thank you.
Very good, Fabio. Thank you very much for setting the scene and giving that overview. Just for information, we do have over 100 participants in this session, and new ones I think are joining as we go along. We already have a number of questions, and I see also that people are voting on the questions. So there's one that has floated to the top of the list. Perhaps let's start with this one. It's actually quite a sort of practical question about the conditions for applying for ERC grants and equal opportunities. So Katalin Popper asks, are we going to consider extending the ERC application window for male candidates with children, similar to the system we have now in place for female candidates? some national funding agencies already have this in place. So I don't know whether Fabio or Jean-Pierre, which of you would like to address that?
I can try to answer, and Jean-Pierre will correct me if I'm imprecise in my answer. I think the extension for male candidates is foreseen, but at the condition that the male candidates can demonstrate their parental leave in connection with the child. Whereas for female candidates, our extensions of 18 months per child is given without any documentation, but just upon the declaration of the candidate. I hope I reproduced faithfully our policy.
Thank you, Fabio.
Actually, maybe a comment on this. I would add, of course, this is, in a sense, a way of supporting women who have children in a certain way. And of course, some people could think this is just a formal step. But the reality is we have been checking, and we monitor this continuously at ERC, that actually the women who have been allowed to apply beyond the time limit for the starting grants and the considered grants actually have the same success rate as the ones who are actually within the normal time frame. So I think this opportunity is actually effective. And actually, I met a number of grantees, women grantees, who told me that for them it made really a difference, because it's just a fact that in many societies at the moment, the support that the men provide to the taking care of children is not exactly the same as the time spent by women. I think this is slowly changing. It depends on the societies. I know, for example, in France, it has just been voted that the parental leave for the father at the moment of birth has been doubled, which of course is a sign that the society is supporting this better sharing between men and women of the taking care of children.
Yeah, if I may add just one small remark to conclude this subject. In the ERC, we have a permanent working group on gender issues, chaired by Professor Barbara Romanovic, and we are closely monitoring also the outcome of the call to ensure that there is no gender bias in the evaluation, and or no bias in general, for example, also for male parents who had to take parental leave because of their children.
Thank you both. So moving on, we have a question that's at the top of the list currently from Cécile, who asks it's a question about geographical balance and the ERC evaluation process. Cécile asks, differences in research and higher education systems across the EU mean that the ERC candidate profile selection process may be biased depending on where candidates did their career. What can we do to address this issue?
Well, maybe one thing we know the bias has to do, indeed, depending on the countries you are living, having access to a stable position varies a lot. And there are countries where it takes a long time before you can really offer a real job. The other difference, which I could witness, and I know some countries finally took some steps to deal with that, is, of course, for the scientists who are teaching, the teaching load vary a lot from one country to the next. And worse than that is also the fact that in some countries, winning research grants doesn't allow you to get relief from teaching. And of course, if your teaching load is very high, then the probability that you can dedicate enough time to do very high-level research is of course not obvious at all, because you just have too much to do. And so this is also another issue which needs to be addressed structurally, that is really making sure that people who are teaching, and of course that's a fundamental part of the higher education system, and many researchers appreciate very much to teach. I myself, I was in the CNRS for 44 years, but I spent 26 years as a professor at École Polytechnique, sometimes part-time, sometimes full-time, which meant I was on leave from my CNRS position. And so, of course, having such a flexibility where you can balance the time you dedicate to teaching and the time you dedicate to research is, of course, something which structurally varies a lot from one country to the next.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. If I'm allowed, I will just move a little bit down the list, because the very first question we received from one of our participants is also with a geographical focus, so perhaps we could take that one as well. Sasa Kukovic says, is there any mechanism to support Western Balkan countries with some special program, as there are many researchers with great ideas and results, even though conditions are not so good? They produce amazing results. National funds are usually very limited, and EU support is thus crucial. Jean-Pierre, I know that personally you've invested quite some time and energy on the Western Balkans. Would you like to comment on Sasa's question?
Well, I think at the moment, as far as I know, I mean, in particular, a country like Serbia, which is in the process of maybe joining the EU in the coming years, so as, in a sense, a special status among the associated countries. And so, for sure, researchers, if I take the example of Serbia, can apply, but many other countries in the Balkans can apply to ERC. For the moment, as far as I know, there is no special program for this, but maybe it's just because I'm not aware of those. Definitely, I know that among the special activity in the framework program dedicated to widening participation, and of course, Western Balkan is relevant for this. Then there are some specific programs like twinning and teaming. How much this can be applied to Western Balkans, I'm not so sure. So therefore, I know for the ERC that indeed, when I visited Serbia, I could see some grantees, some of them remarkably successful, but still the number was not very large. That's a reality. Thank
you, Jean-Pierre. Let me just jump back to the top of the list. And we have a question from Olja Toljagic, who asks, in your opinion, what are some of the strategies institutions like universities should apply to nurturing and training their talent on the road to applying for ERC grants? So our host institutions do provide support to potential applicants. We also have the national contact points, so there are structures in place to help people who may be considering applying for grants. But Fabio, perhaps would you like to come in on this question? You're based in the University of Padua yourself. What strategies do you think universities can adopt to encourage and support potential applicants?
Well, before the strategies, the local strategies adopted by university and research institutions, I think there are national strategies, and our analysis, the analysis that the dedicated agency helping the ERC is regularly performing, show that there is a strong correlation between the number of grants delivered to institutions, to researchers operating in certain countries, and the percentage of the gross national product devoted to research and innovation. There is also a strong correlation with the top, the fraction of publications in the top 1%. So the first action to make institutions in a country more competitive in the ERC calls is to strengthen the national research system, and perhaps the forthcoming recovery plan that delivers a substantial amount of money to certain countries could be an opportunity to invest in strengthening research at the national level. Having said this, institutions can do a lot, and indeed some are doing. As you know, Italy is also not performing very well, at least in terms of success rates in the ERC calls. So, but the ERC, besides delivering grants to ambitious scientists to keep European research competitive at the highest level, is also having an impact in transforming the research systems of the different countries. So actions that have been taken by nations and by institutions is to modernize the research system and to get the population of, to offer to the population of researchers the possibility of competitive calls for individual grants at the national level and at the local level. This certainly is something that can make a researcher more used to a climate of competition in seeking for grants for their research. And, well, the teaching load has already been mentioned by Jean-Pierre. Diminishing the teaching load, especially for young scientists who are entering the world of research and have to establish their careers, is another measure that could give good fruits.
Thanks very much for that complete answer, Fabio. I suggest we move on because there are quite a lot of questions now coming in. Again, moving down the list by order of popularity, I'm being strictly democratic here. We have a question on the windows for the ERC's different grant schemes. Marela Knes asks, will the PhD deadlines 7 or 12 years after PhD be adjusted for delays caused by COVID, especially for women who had to look after their children? So these two possible causes for delays, either related to the pandemic or to do with childcare. Do you think on the next calls under Horizon Europe, will there be some leeway in terms of the eligibility windows?
Well, the difficulty with this, I certainly understand the question, and indeed, depending where, how people had to cope with the situation, actually make things really, I mean, made the handicap big or not so big. The difficulty is in the sense that this cannot be done in a sense. Anytime the ERC needs to be fair. So anytime we introduce some kind of a exception, or then one has to document on which basis the exception can be justified by the people who apply. So in a sense, there is always a legal side to the thing. That is, declaration is of course necessary, but at some point you want the declaration to be funded on something which can be objectivized. So this makes the introducing a condition of this sort a bit more complicated. Still, I think this is one issue we could raise at the level of the European Commission to be sure that whether it's this can be accepted or not. Still, I mentioned that at some point either you change the limit for everybody, and then of course that's easy. But one thing we know at the ERC, that anytime you change any limit, in particular for the starting grants, we know we're already almost at the limit of how many applications we can deal in a good way. And so pushing the upper limit could actually put the ERC in a serious logistic difficulty, just because it will automatically increase the number of applicants for reasons which are easily understood. So I think there is this balance between being caught in introducing a rule which could be challenged by some in terms of its fairness, and the other part, which is also the logistical consequences of doing something completely across the board. So I think, but the issue is a real issue which needs to be discussed and assessed in some way. And this is not so easy because there will be very little time to do that. I mean, the hope of the ERC is that if Horizon Europe is announced on time, then the calls will be which are based on the work program. And for the moment, of course, the work program was designed at a moment where COVID was not there. So the work program would have to be changed. And then the announcement of the calls will happen if things go okay in January. So it means the time frame to get this resolved is extremely short.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for taking that question. There's quite a lot of additional questions coming in, and also people are voting, and I'll continue to take the questions in order. So there's at least one question on interdisciplinarity. There may actually have been a second one, but let's take the one that's at the top of the list. So Johannes asks, or says that we encourage transdisciplinary research, and there is the possibility to include a secondary panel in the evaluation of grant proposals. But in reality, Johannes says it seems that applicants often suffer, in inverted commas, for being in between research areas. Are you still working on improving the evaluation of transdisciplinary research?
Yes, I can start the answer on that. Of course, the ERC is very much concerned about a fair treatment of interdisciplinary proposals. As you say, there is the possibility of indicating secondary panels and descriptors in different panels. We have followed the success rate of interdisciplinary proposals, and indeed we have seen that in past years that success rate was slightly lower than the success rate of proposals that were falling into a single panel. But we have also taken some measures. We have strengthened the possibility of adding external panel members coming from other panels for the discussion of interdisciplinary proposals, and we are constantly recommending to panels to take the opinion of external panel members coming from different panels into full account in their final evaluation. Well, also the whole synergy program that was restarted after a long break a few years ago is going in the direction of interdisciplinarity. Typically, successful synergy proposals have a high degree of interdisciplinarity, although not all of them. Our regret in that case is that the age distribution of successful synergy applicants is rather skewed towards an advanced grant profile. We would be happier if more scientists also in the younger profiles, those of consolidator and starting grant scientific age, would be more successful in synergy grants. But perhaps Jean-Pierre can complement what I just said.
No, I think what you said, Fabio, is absolutely correct. And this is, so for example, just to give two concrete elements, one thing we have been witnessing, indeed, the success rate is slightly lower for interdisciplinary applications to go to stage 2. You know, all the evaluation in ERC calls are really a 2-stage evaluation. But then what you also notice is that this difference in success rate, which was quite stable, not very high, but stable in the going to step 2, actually basically disappeared in step 2. So you would expect if there is an over selection in step 1, it should be in the end a more higher success rate for interdisciplinary application in step 2. This we didn't see, but at least there was no further degradation. The second element I want to bring is that we have been monitoring very closely how we could make the impact of the external opinion stronger. And that's what we introduced, what we call the Traveling Evaluator, which means a traveling panel member, which is the possibility for a member of a panel to actually come physically to the meeting of the other panel in which his or her report has been requested, so that because we noticed, of course, reading an evaluation is not the same as hearing somebody defending or commenting on a project. Sometimes the comment is not positive, but anyway, so I think we have been doing this, and in the case of Synergy, for example, we went even one step further, because the panels are formed after we have identified the applications that the panel is going to evaluate. And even for Synergy, we have a very elaborate system of traveling evaluators from one panel to the next, although the panels are by constitution quite pluridisciplinary. So, of course, this pluridisciplinarity dimension for the ERC is absolutely not secondary. We really try to monitor it as closely as we can, and as soon as we detect some bias or some unsatisfactory situation, we try to address them in the best possible way.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Fabio, you mentioned in your reply our Synergy grants, and in fact, the next question is related to Synergy grants. And Nick Oliveri asks what we can do to increase success rates when it comes to Synergy grants. Unfortunately,
the success rates, as you know, the number of unfortunately, the success rate is depending on the available budget. So this year, unfortunately, the success rate in Synergy grants was around 7.6%, if I remember, whereas in the past year, in the past call, was 13.1%. And the best, we are really sad of seeing so many extremely good proposals that are classified with the highest mark by panel or very stringent and competent evaluators not accessing funding. So the way to increase the success rate is, going back to my initial speech, is to increase the ERC budget.
Maybe a comment on this. Success rate is the ratio between two numbers. Of course, the number of proposals which are funded, but also the denominator is the number of proposals we received. Unfortunately, for the work program of the ERC, which is in the hands of the Scientific Council, we have to decide how much money we allocate to each of the programs of ERC, starting grants, consolidators, advance, and Synergy, ahead of time. That is, before we know how many people apply. And for Synergy, we were indeed, when it was relaunched in 2018, we were estimating the number of grants, number of applications we would receive. And we were, in a sense, lucky that we guessed the right number, 300. And then, since we announced that we would put more money in 2019, we were expecting to have more applications in 2019. And then, a bit to our disappointment, the number of applications didn't grow as we thought it would be growing, in particular because we had announced very early that the support for Synergy grants in 2019 would be higher. So as a result, for 2020, we decided to reduce the amount of money we put in Synergy, because it looked like our guess for the number of applications in 2019 was wrong. Actually, we actually were back to more or less the figures we had anticipated for 2019 in 2020, at the moment where we had reduced the budget, because that was, maybe we thought maybe we have overestimated the number of projects we could receive. So you see, this is a complicated process, because since the success rate is, as I mentioned, the ratio between two numbers, actually one of the nominator is, of course, determined by how much money is available, but the denominator is purely the result of people applying.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Let's move on. There are still quite a number of questions, and the time is going quite quickly. We have a question on open access, a very topical issue. Rosa Bernal Carrera mentions the public statement made by the Scientific Council last July, calling for open access plans to respect researchers' needs. On the other hand, she says, open access policy is going to be mainstream in the new Horizon Europe program. Could you please comment on this? I wonder, Jean-Pierre, would you like to tackle this one?
Since the decision in July was taken when I was not in the position of being the chair, so maybe I leave it to Fabio.
I see.
Well, first of all, I would like to reiterate that the Scientific Council of the ERC is completely committed to open access, and it has shown that over the years, in many cases adopting more stringent policies on open access than those that were adopted at that time by the other programs of the European Commission. But there are in a sense, we feel that as a Scientific Council and as ERC, we have a strong responsibility towards the community of researchers. And in particular, we should guarantee the freedom of the researchers to publish in their journal of choice, and equality for all our grantees, independently of the country where they conduct their research or independently of the field where they conduct the research, to pay for open access or to publish, in any case, in their journals of choice. So we were because of this, and after a discussion that has been going on for years, and in part of the discussion, the president was involved during his previous term, we were worried about possible negative consequences for the researchers, especially in the economically weaker countries, and especially in the economically less supported fields of research. So we were calling for more flexibility in the implementation of the transition to open access that we fully endorse and support.
So
Thanks,
I can
Fabio.
say a word, as Fabio mentioned, that of course this problem has been discussed for years. I'm fully comfortable with the position taken by the Scientific Council. And maybe just a small addition to what Fabio said, which I think is very important, is that depending on the communities, you see ERC is covering many different communities, and the value and the process by which people publish varies hugely from one community to the other. In particular, the number of co-authors can be huge in some fields, and can be, I'm a mathematician, and mathematicians don't publish with many other authors. Personally, I've rarely published with other authors. And so because of this huge diversity, and also the diversity concerns what kind of system is available for publishing. In some disciplines, what is most important are not articles in journals, they are really conference proceedings. In the humanities, it's more monographies which are important, or chapters in books. And so these different settings actually are, in a sense, backed by quite different economical systems. Of course, they are the big publishers on one side, but they are in a number of areas much smaller publishers which play a critical role, and sometimes are really in charge of the reference journals. And so because of this huge diversity, one has to be very careful that imposing on a very rigid system is actually not taking care of this diversity. On top of that, I think for many researchers, the idea that you pay to publish, in the sense you buy your space, is something which I think even from a purely ethical point of view is not a very good principle, because of the fact that it gives power to the people who control the money in the lab. and publishing should be a right for researchers. It should not be something which depends on whether, the person who really computes how much money is available allows you or doesn't allow you to publish. I think it's there's also quite a deep question behind it.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre and Fabio, for tackling that question, what is quite a complex and sensitive issue, clearly. We've got about 15 minutes left. There are still quite a number of questions. I apologize, I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them, but let's try to tackle quickly some of them. And I do want to make sure that I leave some minutes at the end for Jean-Pierre, because I know that you wanted to share some closing thoughts with us before we end the session. But we have a couple of questions on associated countries in the New Horizon Europe programme. Rahel Byland says that the currently proposed budget does not include the contributions from potential future associated countries such as the UK and Switzerland. Their contributions have the potential to increase the budget, but in a pay-as-you-go mode, because they will only pay for their own candidates. Have we taken this into account in the evaluation procedures? And if yes, how? And then if I just try to link this with a question from Bedana Bapuli, who asks particularly about the UK and association in Horizon Europe. Is there still hope? Bedana asks, and what are the implications for the ERC? So if you could tackle both of those questions on association, that would be fantastic.
Please.
Well, first, the UK issue, of course, is not a secondary one for everybody because of the weight and the quality of the research which is done in the UK. And we know that our UK colleagues really are very mobilized to try and obtain that their government is really putting association to Horizon Europe with a high priority. As you can understand, it's a very highly political question, and it's very difficult to anticipate what will be the issue. One thing I can say is that early on in the process of Brexit, I was invited by Michel Barnier to talk with his team to present what is the reality of the intensity of exchanges and the importance of research conducted in the UK. So I can say that I found this exchange a very good quality because people wanted to know about the facts and they wanted to base the EU position on facts, which I appreciate very much. So now I think it's really a question mark. Now, concerning the other side, actually, we should not, as you know, for reasons which to me have not been completely obvious, UK and Switzerland have been put in the same category of countries which could be associated. So now, imagine that the UK is associated at the moment. You know, the UK represents about slightly more than 20% of ERC grants in average in a year. So, of course, having 20% more or 20% less is, of course, in terms of load, in terms of work to be done, is very significant, but also in terms of money. So this is why the pay-as-you-go rule, which is a priori mentioned as the way for associated countries, this will continue in the future, in particular for the ones who are like UK and Switzerland, but also potentially new associated countries like Japan or Singapore or others. So it's, of course, the pay-as-you-go rule guarantees normally if the money paid by the country comes to ERC proportionally to the applications we receive, then we give, then of course this should guarantee that there is no impact on researchers from member states in terms of the support they will get with the money from the EU. Now, this is something which in the present wording of the Article 12, which is the article dealing with association, is object of comments, in particular by the Council. I know the Parliament also has some views on this. And so probably having a very clear way the pay-as-you-go rule is applied is going to be, for the ERC, extremely important.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Let's try and take another couple of questions before we pass over to you, Jean-Pierre, for your closing remarks. Andrea Bell asks if there are any innovations that the ERC is planning under Horizon Europe. For example, the Synergy Grant was introduced midway through the 7th Framework Programme. Is the ERC considering any other funding, introducing any new funding schemes?
Well, I can start the answer to this. Well, of course, to consider new funding schemes, we would need to know the budget, because we only by the knowledge of the budget we can discuss what funding schemes we can finance and how much. But this doesn't mean that the Scientific Council hasn't been working to prepare for Horizon Europe in updating its grant schemes. For example, from 2021 on, 2 new panels will be introduced, one in the domain of physical sciences and engineering, and one in the domain of social sciences and humanities. And this will be accompanied by a rationalization and updating of the panel descriptors and subdescriptors. The reason for doing that is twofold. First of all, we needed to follow the rapid evolution of science in many domains. And second, we noticed that some of the panels were becoming undersubscribed and some others oversubscribed. So we, at a certain point, for some panels, we had even to split the panel in two at the moment of the interviews in order to make the evaluation manageable. Now, with these modifications, we believe that there will be a more accurate description of the scientific landscape, still in the spirit that every frontier science is welcome to the ERC, and also that the panels, the population of proposals in the different panels will be more equally distributed.
Among the study which has been done by the Scientific Council, very thorough one, involving a lot the panel members, in particular the panel chairs, has been to try and see whether we could be more flexible in the organization of panels. And the reason to do that was partly what Fabio already mentioned, that the evolution of topics, so in a sense the description of domains or topics covered by a given panel is of course revised continuously, but still maybe from time to time one need to take more radical steps. And so this is something which has been looked into with a lot of modeling based on taking past calls to see whether the organization we had in mind would be more adapted. And of course, this is a very sophisticated work which has been done. The conclusion was it was not so obvious to do that. Actually, one of our main motivations there was really the fluctuations in the number of applications arriving in a given panel, and with some panels becoming so much oversubscribed that actually it made the evaluation very difficult. And so we felt that if we could find a mechanism by which, by changing the composition of the panels over time, depending on the applications received, then, of course, the change would be a rather marginal one, but still we could handle these big fluctuations which happen from 1 year to next in the number of applications arriving in a panel in a much better way. And what was encouraging for us was the fact that in the case of Synergy, we managed to do that in a very efficient way by, as I mentioned, designing the panels after we knew the list of applications received, after the first step was taken out, which was the reason for Synergy to have a 3-step evaluation. So I think this is still in the making. We are using sophisticated tools to see whether such an adaptation is feasible, whether it's does make the management so complex that it becomes really a difficulty. But it shows that since for ERC evaluation is really the heart of the matter, we know that we have to have the best possible evaluation, and best possible evaluation means on responding to a demand which is changing all the time. So this is the big challenge that ERC is facing. And we know, because we are getting very close to the saturation of the system, that of course fluctuations can push us in situations which are not favorable for high-level evaluation.
Thank you. Just looking at the clock, we have about 5 minutes left in this session. I'm just wondering, Jean-Pierre, perhaps this is the moment to pass over to you so that you can share some closing thoughts, and then perhaps
maybe it would be a bit too long. Maybe one more question, and then I will
Let's take one more question. So the top of the list currently is a question on research infrastructures. Federica Paina works for research infrastructure making technology available to the scientific community. She doesn't mention which one, but she says that Horizon Europe seems to focus more on applied research, leaving somewhat behind fundamental research, and she finds this a source of concern. We heard yesterday in the session with Nobel and Kavli Prize winners that this distinction between applied and fundamental research is perhaps not such a good way of seeing things. But how do you see the picture in Horizon Europe in terms of the question raised by Federica about the balance between applied and fundamental research?
Fabio, you...
it comes back to one point that I touched in my introduction. Of course, research infrastructures are very important, and are also important in countries that are important to strengthen countries that are less performing at the moment in ERC calls, because of course the attractiveness of a country depends also on the global scientific and research system that includes research infrastructures. But research infrastructures are close cousins of the ERC, because to research infrastructures, the ERC and Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions belong to Pillar 1 of Horizon Europe, excellent science. So, in a sense, we can be joined in the request of a healthy fraction of the Horizon Europe budget to be devoted to Pillar 1, that includes, besides the ERC, also research infrastructures.
Thanks, Fabio. So with a couple of minutes left to go, I think perhaps we have to end that in terms of the Q&A. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us today and who posted questions. I apologize it wasn't possible to get through everything, but I think certainly it was very useful that Jean-Pierre and Fabio made themselves available. And I hope you're impressed at how engaged our scientific council is, not just in the big political issues, but also in the day-to-day operations of the ERC, and going forward, how we can continue to make those run as efficiently as possible. So we will be making a recording of this session available after the event. Thanks once again for tuning in, and I will now hand over to Jean-Pierre to deliver some closing remarks before we end the session. Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tony, for organizing this. And so my closing remarks, actually, they are just 2 points I want to make. One, of course, for what is absolutely critical for the ERC is its relation to the scientific community, and that we get the most ambitious and actually high risk, high reward applications from scientists. And because this is so critical, it is critical also because if we get this, then we can convince the best researchers to come as evaluators. There is really a very, there is a consistency there, which is important. And then my second point is coming to the budget. Why are we so sensitive about stagnating budget? Because we know in a moment where actually in a number of countries, bottom-up research is likely to be squeezed, that the number of applications coming to ERC is likely going to grow. So if we have a stagnating budget, it means that then the success rate will be diminishing, because again, when you talk about success rate, you have to take into account how many applications are coming. And then that's the main risk, and that's why we are really concerned. If the success rate go down, we know there is some kind of threshold, typically 10%. Fortunately, at the moment, we are above that. We're aiming to 15% as success rate. But if we go below a certain threshold, we know the very best scientists stop to apply to ERC because they feel it's too much of a gamble. And then this is a threat, not just for ERC, but for its quality. And the whole construct of ERC, which is to attract the best applications, convince the best researcher to evaluate, would be could be jeopardized by such a process. So that's why the fight for the budget is not just in terms of numbers, but it's also in terms of making sure that the ERC success can be continued, and its continuation depends on the very best researchers submitting the applications and the best evaluators to accept to work for us. Thank you very much for your time and your interest in the ERC.
Thanks to you, Jean-Pierre, and also Fabio. It's 12 o'clock, so I think we can end the session on time. And thanks again to all of you who've joined us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe that I'm not empowered to end the session, so I would rely on one of our technicians to close us down. Thanks also to those commenting in the chats that they've appreciated the session. That's good to hear.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Tony, for your help. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Tony.